Graphic web design has been around since the year 2000. Their website designers specialize in website redesign, e-commerce website design, and content management design. Unlike other companies, they can also handle your printing, social media design, and web hosting needs. They stay up to date on the most current website design trends, including those for blogs and social media pages like Facebook and Twitter. So you can be assured your website tops your competition. When you need a website designed for your business, or you are looking for a website redesign, feel free to contact Graphic Web Design at graphicwebdesign.net. The China Sea sees a military buildup, North Korea talks tough, and recovery updates on the Sewol and Malaysia airline flights. I'm Steve Miller. These stories and more are on the May 2nd edition of Asia News Weekly. Welcome to the show, everyone. Our first story is from North Korea. The boisterous nation to the north of Seoul has attempted to steer headlines its way during President Obama's Asian tour with some inflammatory remarks about South Korean President Park Geun-hye and conducting some live fire drills off its western shores. Previous North Korean press releases have called her a bitch and a whore, and recently they've now added prostitute and comfort woman as well, referring to the South Korean relationship to the United States. Quote, Park Geun-hye's recent behavior with Obama was like a mean, immature girl begging gangsters to beat up someone she does not like, said the Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of Korea. North Korea's official news agency, the Korean Central News Agency, added, quote, or a crafty prostitute eagerly trying to frame someone by giving her body to a powerful pimp. If Obama and Park Geun-hye believe that they could change our minds with such threats and blackmailing, they can't be more foolish. End quote. It's that last statement that I've been echoing for years. Nothing the West has done regarding the so-called six-party talks has been effective. The reason for that is simple. The members haven't created a situation that's beneficial for North Korea. Why would they ever cease development of nuclear weapons when sanctions and other so-called punishments haven't halted their progress? Attention must be directed towards creating an advantageous situation. David Albright, president of the Institute for Science and International Security, said, quote, I think it is a mistake to think that they require this testing in order to design a militarized warhead. I think they may have gotten one from Pakistan or China. But what they can't get without testing is reliability. So the testing is invaluable to make sure everything works. End quote. So, when is the next nuclear test going to take place? Well, commercial satellite imagery indicates preparation continues, and once the facility is fully prepped, analysts say it could be conducted in about 2 weeks. Nick Hansen with the Center for International Security and Cooperation at Stanford University, as well as 38 North, said North Korea might actually be conducting 2 different tests, or one back-to-back. He added Pakistan did it that way, and if you do that, you don't catch as much flack from the international community as if you would if you test one and then another one a couple of months later. However, just recently, the KCNA released the following statement, quote, the DPRK will advance along the road of bolstering up nuclear deterrent, unhindered now that the United States brings the dark clouds of a nuclear war to hang over the DPRK. There is no statute of limitations to the DPRK's declaration that it will not rule out a new form of nuclear test clarified by it in the March 30 statement. This is the exercise of the inviolable right to self-defense. End quote. Now, this last statement may indicate North Korea is postponing the test. Speculation leads some to conclude there might be some problems with the test technology. And rather than risk catastrophe, North Korea could be siding with caution, as well as protecting its image. As more develops on this story, I'll be sure to keep you posted with our Twitter feed. Ever since China expanded its maritime borders to encompass most of the South China Sea and stepped up its desire to control a disputed island with Japan, we've seen the nation parade its ships around in public more and more. First was the proud announcement that Chinese vessels were able to breach the Pacific Ocean. Then United States Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel got the VIP treatment on board the Liaoning aircraft carrier. And finally, that same aircraft carrier was featured in 2 different Chinese music videos. While we are seeing more of China's military might, it isn't revealing all of its secrets, and recently published a paper citing the need for tightened security. This is a key requirement to meet Xi Jinping's goal of having China's military capable of winning a war. Chinese military personnel must, quote, clearly recognize the severe and complicated situation facing the protection of secrets, always remain sober-minded, persist in strengthening knowledge of enemies and awareness of duty, and spare no effort to fight the battle of maintaining secrecy, end quote. Given this is the ultimate goal, we now must begin to speculate what we don't know about China's military strength. For example, as of April 25th of this year, China has built or purchased more naval vessels than Japan. Their quality may not be as good as Japan's, but in sheer numbers, China's fleet almost doubles the number of destroyers and frigates over that of Japan's. And that's just what we know about today. However, the search for MH370 also exposed a weakness in China's military arsenal, the Sub-Hunter, which they have already announced that they are rectifying. But let's look at the other side of the equation. Japan is currently moving forward with modifying their constitution to incorporate collective self-defense. This is the ability to send military forces, no longer to be branded as self-defense forces, out to assist allies where needed. Japan has been very vocal about supporting the Philippines in their disputes with China, and has also voiced support for other ASEAN nations. In fact, both sides are slowly building up material resources in what some have likened to a modern Cold War. To be certain, of all the hotspots in the world, this is the flashpoint that could ignite significant confrontation. But what are your predictions for the coming months in the South China Sea? Be sure to share them with me on our page or via Twitter. Visit AsiaNewsWeekly.net for links to the stories mentioned in this week's podcast. While there, you can leave your thoughts in the comment section, and you can do that also on Facebook and Twitter, where you can also receive updated information throughout the week. Just go to facebook.com/AsiaNewsWeekly or follow us at AsiaNewsWeekly on Twitter. Believe it or not, when I first moved to Asia, one of the questions I received most often was, Steve, where are you living? North or South Korea? Now, at the time, I thought that was a pretty interesting question because I really hadn't heard of too many people going to North Korea, especially if they were coming to Asia to teach. So, of course, I would respond, I'm going to live in South Korea. However, going to North Korea does have a certain calling for many.
Go behind the Iron Curtain with the North Korea travel app and explore the world's most secretive nation from the comfort of your own home. Or book a once-in-a-lifetime trip with just a single click. This fully interactive guidebook brings together...
It's an interesting idea, an app that will actually help you travel to North Korea. So, I decided to speak with Chad O'Carroll about this new endeavor.
So the app is intended to be the most comprehensive guide to North Korea that's ever been made in app form. It's for iOS and Android, and it works on tablets and cell phones, and is really designed to show how much of North Korea is open, and to also provide people that are potentially thinking about going there with the sort of information required to make an educated choice about whether or not it's a good idea to go or not. And the genesis of it is about a year ago. A couple of friends of mine were toying with ideas to sort of disrupt the travel industry. One of which was to sort of create a framework in which you could wed guides to destinations with a custom booking facility. And given my work on North Korea and background and connections, I suggested that we work together and do one on North Korea. And should the North Korea one work, the idea is to roll this out to other countries like Iran, Myanmar, anywhere it's basically difficult to get information, and where it's not just a case of going on kayak or priceline.com to book your accommodation and travel.
The app itself has a lot of different features in terms of being able to look at destinations, create itineraries, but also communicate or put you in contact with other folks who are actually operating tours there.
So we basically partnered with 6 agencies, which we thought, based on their track records, are among the most reliable and trustworthy. And we said to them, look, this app's coming out. Do you want to be part of it? The way it works is customers build, if they want, they can build an itinerary of places they really want to go to. And then they press a button, and it will then send their custom itinerary request to up to 6 agencies simultaneously. This is where it gets into this sort of industry disrupting area, because that then effectively gets these companies into a sort of bidding war to win the customer's business, and the companies then have to email, get in touch with the customer, and it all goes from there, basically.
This is designed for people who are trying to make an educated choice as far as whether or not a trip to North Korea is for them. But what kind of target audience are you really after?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just, I guess, a purpose of the app, but really the audience is a lot wider. There's really strong interest in North Korea from a number of people in a number of areas these days, and I think the biggest audience is probably going to be the sort of armchair traveler type that never actually intends to go to North Korea, but is just fascinated by the country, wants to see what kind of things you can do there. I mean, as far as I know, North Korea, there's a travel guide published by Brat on North Korea, and it's now going into its 4th or 5th print, which is quite rare these days in the print sector. And I think it underscores the interest in North Korea. It's just, people have a very strong interest in learning about the country, and hopefully the app will enable them to learn more about it. It almost facilitates a virtual tourist experience, and I think, that's going to be the bulk of the users.
When is the app going to become available for download?
It's available from May 7th in the iTunes Store and on the Google Play Store. And you can find out links for the app at northkoreatravel.com.
Speaking of traveling to North Korea, April 15th was the Day of the Sun, or Kim Il-sung's birthday. It also marked for the very first time foreigners were able to participate in the Mangyeongdae Prize International Marathon. A total of 225 runners from 27 different countries took place in the event, and is a sign the DPRK is finally starting to try and focus on capturing those elusive tourist dollars. However, about 2 weeks ago, it was also revealed through the state's official news agency that the DPRK detained an American tourist for what it called, quote, rash behavior at immigration. Now, according to the report, Matthew Todd Miller, which may or may not be his name based on the reporting because of the differences in using surnames in South Korea and the United States. He had a tourist visa for North Korea, but while in immigration, he tore it up and shouted that he wanted asylum and was choosing North Korea as his shelter. The situation is being investigated and took place, as I said, about 2 weeks ago. However, the announcement was just made as President Obama arrived in Seoul, most likely as an attempt to embarrass the United States, according to many analysts. This marks the second American detained in recent months, and on the heels of Kenneth Bae, who is still being held. But let's be clear on this issue. Kenneth Bae entered North Korea to proselytize, something that is clearly illegal, and he's facing a stiff punishment for it. Now, I don't agree with that aspect of the situation, but Bae went in knowing he was going to break the law. In this particular issue, who knows what Miller was thinking? There's not a lot known about the situation, but I doubt the United States will flex any muscles to try and get his release if it does in fact turn out the conditions reported about his apprehension were in fact accurate. If you are inclined to travel to North Korea, make sure you travel smart. And you know what? I think this app is a good place to start. This episode of Asia News Weekly is being sponsored by Graphic Web Design. So, as you know, I have a business, and that business, of course, is Asia News Weekly. It's my baby. And for years, I have created videos, and I have actually worked on several different podcasts. And in that time, I would say that my skills at editing together sound and video has grown significantly. However, my artistic ability has never really progressed past, well, I'll be honest with you, I think children in preschool have better talent than I do. So when I wanted a logo for this news podcast, I reached out to Graphic Web Design and I said, Adam, please help me. I want a newsy type logo. It's got to say Asia News Weekly, and I want to have ANW prominent in the design. And you know what? A few days later, he gave me a proof. There were a few things we needed to tweak, but you know what? The logo that you see now for Asia News Weekly is exactly what I wanted and exactly what they produced. It was an awesome business relationship. It was an awesome experience working with them. So if you have a website that you need redesign or you are thinking about building a website, check them out. If you need a logo for your business or are thinking about changing your brand image, I can't recommend them enough. They were a joy to work with. They are a fantastic group of talented individuals. You can find them on the web at graphicwebdesign.net. The Jilin Provincial Archives has released 89 files related to Japan's Kwantung Kempeitai and the Central Bank of the Manchukuo. Some say these archives are of great historical significance, since they are clear examples of atrocities committed by Japanese troops during the 20th century, even though some in Japan are trying to deny such events. Quote, the Abe administration and Japanese rightists have tried to disown history by glorifying or giving ambivalent definitions of Japanese invasions, said Jiang Lifeng, a research fellow at the Institute of Japanese Studies under the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Quote, now they can find answers to what an invasion is through these documents. End quote. Now, this was an obvious swipe at Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Now, Jiang claimed to be stunned when encountering the sheer number of volumes that disclose actions of Japanese troops, including those accused of massacring thousands in Nanjing. One file contained an edition of the Osaka Daily News for December 23, 1937, documenting how Japanese troops killed 85,000 people over 3 days in Nanjing, with the quote saying, dead bodies stretched for 1,000 to 1,500 meters to the lower reaches of the Yangtze River. 25 newly released files relate to comfort women and shows from November 1944 to March 1945, 532,000 yen was transferred by the central bank for the arrangement of comfort women for a military branch. And this was done under an account described as public spending for military use. Su Ji Liang, director of the Comfort Women Research Center at the Shanghai Normal University, said, quote, it is an astonishing fact. It once again proves that the sex slavery system was enforced officially, rather than a private commercial operation as claimed by Japan's right-wing politicians. End quote. It's this differing point of view by Japanese politicians that has stressed relations, but it's unclear how this information will be used by China and if Japan will have an opportunity to review and refute it. Despite the 7 decades that have passed since the end of the Second World War, the wound for many in China is still very deep. These findings may just throw additional salt in them. How do you think China will use this information to shape their foreign policy with Japan, especially since Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said Japan opted to follow a different path, one that involves signing treaties and offering compensation instead of apologies? The small island nation of the Marshall Islands has filed a lawsuit against the United States and other nations citing flagrant violations of international law. It was, after all, this group of islands that was the focus of the United States nuclear tests during the Second World War. So it's no surprise they're the ones taking to task the international community on their failure to follow through on pledges to disarm. The Marshall Islands have filed the suit against the United States, Russia, Britain, France, China, Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea in the International Court of Justice located in The Hague, and filed a federal lawsuit against the United States in San Francisco, naming President Barack Obama as a defendant. At the center of the case, according to the Marshall Islands, is that the countries have failed to abide by the 1968 Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nobel Peace Prize winner Desmond Tutu spoke in support of the suit, saying, quote, "We must ask why these world leaders continue to break their promises and put their citizens and the world at risk of horrific devastation." End quote. Now, the lawsuit itself probably won't go anywhere, as some even listed in the suit aren't members of the 1968 Non-Proliferation Treaty. And even then, after a 1996 ICJ ruling, the negotiations have pretty much stalled. But it does bring about an interesting question on where our world leaders see the planet heading. One of the things that made the Cold War so terrifying was the sheer amount of destructive power created, and it was available at the push of a button. That destructive capability is not something that can be simply waved away. But what is being done about it? Today's world leaders aren't addressing the problem. And as we see in the Asia-Pacific region, there is a buildup in conventional weapons. When we look at the erosion of personal freedoms and the increased government intrusion into our lives, is disarmament and non-proliferation even a priority anymore? New agendas have been set and new plans put in motion. What do you foresee in the next decade? Be sure to share your thoughts. Are you interested about life in Asia? Well, you know what? Every single day I share photos and videos from my life and travels in the region. Like going inside Seoul Station, how scientists preserve Korea's national treasures, and pictures from everyday life in Korea highlighted in stunning black and white. So connect with me personally on Twitter so you never miss anything. I'm at Chi Ranger there. That's at QI Ranger. Hong Kong ended sanctions against the Philippines last week after they reached consensus over a diplomatic row that began when 8 tourists from Hong Kong were killed after a botched bus hijacking rescue that occurred in 2010. Quote, "The Philippine government expresses its most sorrowful regret and profound sympathy, and extends its most sincere condolences for the pain and suffering of the victims and their families." End quote. And this is from a statement that was issued by the Hong Kong and Philippine governments. Manila Mayor Joseph Estrada traveled to Hong Kong to apologize to the families of the 8 victims and 13 survivors. Some in Hong Kong are taking exception with the wording of the apology, saying sorrowful regret and profound sympathy is not the same as saying you're sorry. It's the same argument South Korea uses when discussing Japan's past transgressions. Sei Chi-kin, whose brother died in the confrontation, said the wording of the apology wasn't quite what he expected, but it's time to move on. Filipino media stated the government was paying $2.57 million to the families in compensation. However, Philippine Cabinet Secretary Jose Almendras would not confirm the amount. Hong Kong Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying told the media after meeting Estrada last week, quote, "With the final resolution of the incident, I sincerely hope the deceased may rest in peace, and the injured and their families can move on with courage and strength. I also believe the relations between the peoples of Hong Kong and the Philippines will start a new chapter." End quote. After the incident, Hong Kong placed a black travel advisory against the Philippines. Now that the agreement has been made, the travel advisory has been lowered to amber. As someone who travels extensively in Asia, one of the first questions brought up when I mentioned the Philippines is how safe is it, especially when discussing the situation with my friends and family here in South Korea. It's a very valid question, given the high-profile media gives to robberies and murders in the country. In this particular situation, Hong Kong's reaction was a bit extreme. Yes, the Philippines botched the rescue of the passengers, but they were also going up against a disgruntled former police officer, someone who had training and knew exactly what to expect. Reports of violence in Mindanao, where decades-long violence has simmered between Muslim separatists and government officials, is also routine. So when something happens there, it's not all that unexpected. Is the Philippines an entirely safe country? No. According to Philippine National Police Directorate for Investigation and Detective Management, crime has been decreasing, and in 2012, 217,812 crimes were reported. The United States Department of State says the following: crime is a significant concern in urban areas of the Philippines. Typical criminal acts include pickpocketing, confidence schemes, acquaintance scams, and in some cases, credit card fraud. Carjacking, kidnappings, robberies, and violent assaults sporadically occur. Now, to put this in context, during the same period in the United States, nearly 9 million property crimes were reported. Context and perspective is everything, and the most important thing to remember when traveling is to be aware of your surroundings and travel smart. Countries aren't good or bad, they're made up of individuals, and everyone is different. But while we're on the subject, I'd really love to know if you've been a victim of crime when traveling abroad. Now, if so, please share your experiences with me. What happened? And more importantly, how did authorities respond? While it may not be possible to change circumstances, knowing how the police and other officials assisted tourists and expats in these situations would be extremely helpful. Before I conclude this week's podcast, I do want to provide a few updates on the Sewol Ferry and Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. President Park Geun-hye has apologized this past Tuesday, saying, quote, "How should I apologize for the failure to prevent the accident and for the insufficient initial response in order to comfort the pains and sufferings of the relatives of the victims, even for a moment?" End quote. She went on to say that she will create a new national safety ministry to oversee future disasters. Search operations continue off the coast of Jindo, and at the time of this recording, 216 bodies have been recovered. South Korean Prime Minister Chung Hong-won announced his immediate resignation this past Sunday morning on national television, taking responsibility for the slow initial response to the ferry accident and apologizing to the victims' families. It's nothing more than an attempt to try and deflect attention from Park Geun-hye, and opposition leaders lashed out at Chung and Park immediately. A total of 18 people have been charged with crimes related to the incident, including the entire navigation crew and 3 members of the Korea Shipping Association's Incheon office. The government is also trying to track down the financials of the family that owns Cheonghaejin Marine Company in preparation for financial compensations to the victims' families. Authorities have also raided the Coast Guard facilities in an attempt to determine whether officials properly handled the tragic incident at the initial stages amidst growing criticism. The ship's captain has said he alerted his superiors that the refitted vessel wasn't able to carry as much weight and had concerns about the Sewol's fitness. A rescue boat that was first on the scene said, "We issued several warning announcements to the Sewol and ordered passengers to jump into the sea." And finally, divers searching for the missing passengers are suffering from several health problems, including decompression sickness. Quote, "Divers are suffering from more fatigue as the rescue operation is being extended. We're seeking more safety measures to prevent their health risks," said Kim Min-sok, a spokesperson from the Ministry of Defense. Regarding MH370, relatives of Chinese passengers were finally able to meet with officials, and in that meeting, a complete chronology of the plane's flight was discussed and the cockpit tapes played. Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott says it is highly unlikely any debris from the missing plane will be found on the surface of the Indian Ocean. He added a United States Navy robot submersible will look at a much larger area of the ocean floor. Abbott told reporters last week that if the underwater drone fails to locate any debris off of Australia's west coast, authorities will have to rethink and expand their search. And finally, as of Wednesday, the United States said it was calling off flight operations in search of the vessel. Well, those are the stories for this week's episode, but before I go, I would like to thank our sponsor once more, Graphic Web Design, a fantastic shop, and if you're looking for a professional logo or website, I highly recommend them. Now, as always, you guys have left some great comments on Facebook, Twitter, and of course YouTube, so let's take a quick look at some of those. From A-Bombs1, to put it morbidly, it, meaning the Sewol Ferry accident, might actually turn out to be one of those good tragedies that reform the country and kick it into gear, saving countless thousands of lives in the coming future. It's the way I can see their lives not being wasted in vain. From TouchJoe772, I think the Japanese issue is that the United States wants Japan to have a military that can protect itself against a growing China. However, I think the Japanese are mistaking this as they do not need to look at their history. And I think this is a mistake made by Japan. One can have a stronger army to protect you, but you also need to acknowledge the past. JXCXTXL wrote regarding the South Korean Prime Minister resigning, "Forcing the Prime Minister out because of the tragedy does not make any sense. He had no part in it, even as a figurehead. Poor guy. The government charged the captain and the crew already, didn't they?" Also, Ricardo Marquez wrote, "If only a political resignation brought back those kids. His resignation shouldn't be for the slow response, but for letting corporations get away with so much to the point of losing innocent lives and destroying hearts." Diali39 wrote in about the Sewol Ferry as well. "As for now, I see this as a tragic accident. However, this doesn't mean I think there was not human error or negligence involved. Get the facts and then formulate an opinion on what the crew members did unlawfully. The resignation of the Prime Minister seems to be a ploy to appease the population that are so irate towards the government regarding the ferry incident." Cherished Adventure had this to add, "I feel this tragedy is an opportunity to really open up and look to make some really good changes going forward. I hope they do this to honor those that have lost their lives." And finally, Carl Hedinger wrote in regarding the Yasukuni Shrine, "I feel like the Japan-Korea thing wouldn't go away even if the war criminals were removed. Both countries' governments are too proud, and though Japan's has become a bit more so recently, it seems a prerequisite to enter into politics in Korea. You must keep a hard line towards Japan and North Korea if you want to have a future in politics here. Hopefully, both will come to their senses and realize that it's a bigger world than just Korea and Japan, and work together towards fixing some of the hot issues happening outside their respective boxes." Great podcast, and I'll keep listening as always. Well, thank you, Carl, and of course, thank you to everyone else joining me this week. You can reach the show by emailing podcast@asianewsweekly.net, and if you use iTunes or Stitcher, I hope you'll take a quick second to rate the show there. Well, that's it for this week's episode. I'm Steve Miller, and until next time, stay true to yourself and always be awesome. Asian News Weekly is written and produced by Steve Miller and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.